us the answer and tells us, the waters which you saw are peoples and multitudes and nations and kings, languages. So it's the kingdoms of the world. And I stood upon the sands of the sea of the nations, and I saw a beast, a kingdom, rise out of the nations, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns. And upon his head the name of blasphemy. Now we picked up that little word blasphemy when we studied Daniel chapter 7. Which component of Daniel chapter 7 was the blasphemous component? It was the little horn power. The little horn power. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power and his seat and great authority. Now, these creatures all sound very familiar, don't they? So let's have a look at an artist's rendition of this beast. He has the head of a lion. There are 10 horns on his head, and on the horns there are crowns. Then he has the body of a leopard, and he has the feet of a bear. Now, the only place we find all of these creatures is in Daniel chapter 7, because there the powers are described as the lion with eagle wings representing Babylon, and then there was the bear. We have the bear component here, which represented the Medes and the Persians. Remember, it was raised up on one side. And then we have the body of a leopard. That was the 4-winged leopard that after Alexander's time into 4 separate entities. And then it had the 10 horns, which represented the power that came out of Rome, so it's the divided Roman Empire. So all of these components are present in this creature. So you have Babylon, you have Medo-Persia, you have Greece, and you have Rome. And there are crowns on the horns, so this is a stage where this beast is exercising authority, because there's a crown on the horns. So it's a conglomerate beast. But upon the whole beast, there is blasphemy. Now let's just see what the Reformers made of this. Now this is Wesley's comment regarding this beast, and he says it quite bluntly. This beast is the Romish papacy. As it came to a point 600 years since, stands now, and will for some time longer. To this and no other power on earth agrees the whole text. And every part of it in every point, as we may see with the utmost evidence from the propositions following. This beast is a spiritually secular power, opposite to the kingdom of Christ, a power not merely spiritual or ecclesiastical, not merely secular or political, but a mixture of both. The beast has a strict connection with the city of Rome. So this is what the Reformers believed. They saw all the components of Daniel chapter 7, and they find them in this beast. And then there are a number of pointers which tell us that the characteristics of the entire beast are very similar to that of the little horn. In fact, they are identical. One of them we've already had is a blasphemous power. So let's continue. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death. Now it doesn't say it was wounded to death. It says, as it were, wounded to death. Some translations say one of the heads seemed to have a mortal wound. So there's a difference. And his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. And that wondered is with an O and not with an A. They didn't walk after the beast. This is a cognitive function. They wondered after the beast. So they had the same mindset as the beast. And they worshipped the dragon, which gave power unto the beast. Now this is quite a profound statement. So they worshipped the dragon, obviously unknowingly, because the dragon gives this power, his power to this beast, and it's a counterfeit system, and the world is beginning to think like this beast and to follow it in its mindset. And they worship the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? So obviously he's powerful. He's not easy to overcome. And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. This reminds us of the little horn power, which did the same. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. Now you will remember that the little horn power ruled for 3.5 years. Now in the Hebrew, the year had 360 days and the month had 30 days. So if you multiply 3.5 by 30 to get the number of days, you get to 1,260. And if you take 42 months of 30 days and you multiply that out, you also get to 1,260. So it's the same time period. So he has the same attributes. He's blasphemous. He has the same time period. And he opened his mouth in blasphemy against God to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. So what is blasphemy? We need to make sure again, as we did when we looked at the little horn. 2 Thessalonians 2 verse 4, remember the reformers said that Paul, in describing the man of sin, was describing the exact same power that Daniel was describing when he described the little horn power. And we looked at all the parallels. Who opposes and exalteth himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. And the reformers claimed that all the parallel Bible texts show that the temple is the church, because Paul, writing to the Ephesians, said, you are the temple of the living God. So here's this power sitting in Christianity. So it's a Christian power. Now, does the Pope claim to have this divine power? Well, he does. Ferrara's Ecclesiastical Dictionary, the Pope is of so great dignity and so exalted that he is not a mere man, but as it were God and the vicar of God. And Cardinal Bellarmine says, all the names which in Scriptures are applied to Christ, by virtue of which it is established that he is over the church, all the same names are applied to the Pope. So he takes all the titles of Christ. Now the word anti also means in the place of. So if someone takes the place of Jesus Christ, he is anti-Christos, anti-Christ. And then he claims infallibility. This is an attribute which belongs to God alone. This is Pope Pius IX, 1846 to 1878, during whose pontificate the doctrine of papal infallibility was dogmatically defined by the First Vatican Council. Now this is quite incredible that they defined it so late, because in practice it had been in vogue and in use throughout their existence. In fact, it came very early on in the first centuries after Christ that they assumed the power of infallibility. So papal infallibility is a dogma of the Catholic Church that states that in virtue of the promise of Jesus to Peter, the Pope is preserved from the possibility of error. When in the exercise of his office, this is official quote from Rome, as a shepherd and teacher of all Christians, in virtue of his supreme apostolic authority, he defines a doctrine concerning faith or morals to be held by the whole church. So he is infallible, he cannot make a mistake. It cannot even happen that in his thinking along these lines, he makes a mistake according to the doctrine. So this is an attribute that belongs to God alone, that he implies to himself. And then Revelation 13 verse 5 says, and power was given unto him to continue 42 months. So you have this specific time period, which we've already analyzed. 42 months, the Hebrew month, 30 days, 30 times 42, 1,260 days. And the reformers all said in one accord that the day-year principle has to apply to prophecy. Otherwise, the other prophecies in the Bible don't work out. If you don't apply it to the one, to this one, then you'd have to ignore it for the others as well. Then none of the prophecies work out. But all the prophecies concerning Christ have to use the day-year principle to apply. Ezekiel 4 verse 6, I've given you a day for a year. So there is a biblical injunction for doing this. Now if we look at the history, Viglius ascended the papal chair in 538 AD. That's when the Ostrogoths finally were eradicated, one of the three horns that were eradicated, under the military protection of Belisarius. So these are the soldiers and the army of the emperor in the east that enabled him to take the throne because his opposition had been removed. This is just history. So we have a starting date for this prophecy. So the legally recognized supremacy of the Pope began in 538 AD when there went into effect a decree of Emperor Justinian making the Bishop of Rome head over all the churches, the definer of doctrine, and the corrector of heretics. So let's add 1,260 years to 538. Well, then we get to 1798. What happened then? Revelation 13 verse 3 says, and I saw one of his heads as if it were wounded to death. As if it were wounded to death. So here was a wound. Now a beast is a kingdom. It's a political entity. So if it receives a mortal wound, that means the political power must be removed from it. So in 1798, what happened? Berthier, the French general under Napoleon, made his entrance into Rome, abolishing the papal government and establishing a secular one. So here, the political power of Rome came to an end. So the beast received a mortal wound. Unless it was a ruse and it just had to appear as if it had a mortal wound. That's another lecture in itself. For today, it received a mortal wound. And now it gives us some details about what the beast's activities were. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints. So it's a persecuting power. And to overcome them. So he would be victorious in what he was doing. And power was given him over all kindred, tongues, and nations. So prophetically, the prophet sees in vision that this power will eventually have power over the entire world. Now, was Rome a persecuting power? Papal Rome? The answer is yes. The Inquisition is history. Everybody knows about it. With torture chambers and sentencing to death at the stake, live burnings, stranglings, every single means was carried out to persecute the saints. From the time of the early Christians right through until after the mortal wound, the Inquisition in Rome was still alive after 1798. And it was run there by the Jesuits. And they were persecuted for heresy. Now heresy means choice, the Greek heresis, deciding for oneself what one shall believe and practice. Because Rome claimed infallibility, so if they defined a doctrine and you refused to believe it, well then you were a heretic and you were sentenced to death. And I saw one of the heads as it were wounded to death, and then this amazing statement, his deadly wound was healed. In other words, if a beast is a political entity, and he loses his political power, then the beast is dead. What will it take to heal and to be alive again? He must get his political power back. Now this didn't affect his church power because he was also ecclesiastical power, But the symbol in the Bible for that is a woman and not a beast. A beast is a political entity. So the beast, the political side of this power, received a deadly wound, and the deadly wound was healed. So he lost his power under Berthier, under the Napoleon power. Italy was made a secular state. All the papal states were taken away. He was only a church. And then he would receive it back. And then, only then, would all the world receive the mindset, wonder after the beast. So only after the healing of the wound. Now it's fascinating when you go back into history and you look at the Assyrian kingdoms, the ancient Assyrian kingdoms, they had this very symbolism. So the Bible draws from known symbolism, which Satan had already counterfeited, knowing how God works, because even in the Old Testament we read about Leviathan, the seven-headed monster, and here the god, or the precursor of the god Marduk, is wounding one of the heads of the seven-headed beast. So the symbols that are used in the Bible, like the lion with eagle wings, these were known to the people of the time. So Daniel would have understood what this actually means. So it's fascinating that we can pick up this symbolism in the archaeology. Well, what happened and how did Rome get its power back? Well, it happened in 1929. The Rome question tonight was a thing of the past. And the Vatican was at peace with Italy. In affixing the autographs to the memorable document, Healing the Wound, extreme cordiality was displayed on both sides. So claimed the San Francisco Chronicle. So they even used the word healing the wound. So in 1929, there's the San Francisco Chronicle with the headlines, Mussolini and Gaspari sign historic Roman pact, healing the wound. Here they are seen signing it. The Vatican received its political power back. And the smallest state in the world was born with the Vatican State, an independent sovereign nation with political power was born. So the wound was healed politically. And power was given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. That's quite an astounding prophecy. So this church that appeared to be politically done for would rise again and would control the entire world. Now this is where this little word, seem to have a mortal wound, comes in. Because what really happened in history is that when the political power for all intents and purposes was removed to the eye of the beholder, they went underground. And through their secret societies and their manipulations, through the Knights of Malta and through all their organizations, the Franciscans and the Jesuits and all of these, they expanded their power into every nation on earth without anyone knowing how it was done. It was a brilliant move. This is the funeral of Pope John Paul II. This is the first time that the mega media was involved in such an event and where the broadcast went to the entire world. And more people witnessed this than had ever before in history witnessed an event on earth. And the Pope lay there on his specially designed coffin, and millions of people watched it on television. And the media said the Pope was the only one to be a world evangelist. He could visit all faiths, Islam and Judaism. He prepared the way for a religious new world order. And we don't have time to show all the photographs and the activities of the papacy, how from shamanism to Hinduism to Voodooism, how he embraced all religions and gathered them together under his influence. And the BBC, to claim that he prepared the way for a religious new world order, is quite fascinating. So this is a power mongering of Rome. On Larry King Live, after the Pope John Paul's death, Billy Graham, who was the then-time leader, as it were, of the Protestant world, claimed that the Pope was the moral leader of the world. So even the ecclesiastical wound that it had received during the Reformation seems to have been healed. At the funeral, whoever was prominent in the world was there. Whether he came from the far right or whether he came from the far left, they were there. Whether they came from supposed pro-religious ideologies to anti-religious ideologies, they were there. Margaret Thatcher being from the right spectrum, Fidel Castro being from the left spectrum, and if your marriage date was set for the funeral date, well, even if you were a prince, you had to change your date of marriage. So this is a very prominent thing. So everybody who was a politician was there, and the living presidents of the United States lined up and even knelt at the casket, something that is unheard of because it was against the American Constitution of separation of church and state. And Newsweek at that stage claimed, under John Paul II, who helped bring down the Iron Curtain, the Holy See gained more political clout than it had enjoyed since the Renaissance. So I think the prophet looked ahead and he saw this power putting its tentacles into every nation, tribe, and tongue on the planet. If any man have an ear, let him hear. He that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. So now we're at a point where the Bible says, do you know who this beast is? Do you know why he looks like he looks? And if we analyze it a little bit further, we see that this is a conglomerate beast of Daniel. Now Daniel, if we look at the animals in Daniel, then we'll see that the lion had how many heads? 1. And the bear had how many heads? 1. So now we've got 2 heads. And then comes the leopard beast. How many does he have? 4. So we've got 6. And the final terrible beast has how many heads? 1. That's 7 heads. So there are 7 heads in Daniel chapter 7, and this beast in Revelation 13 has 7 heads. How many horns were there in Daniel? 10. This beast has 10 horns. The crowns are on the horns. So this is a conglomerate beast, but the attributes are all the attributes of the little horn. So it must be the little horn. Then why does it have all the attributes of all the other beasts? The answer is simply this, that those political kingdoms, Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, all ceased to be world powers. They disappeared off the stage of history as world powers, but their ideology did not disappear. So the Babylonian ideology of mother and child worship didn't disappear. The deities that were worshipped, the many deities that you can consult, they didn't disappear. And then the Medo-Persians, they had a totally different structure which they added to the religious system, where they built the Maitreya, the little groupings, and you could belong to different groups of people with different activities within the religious orders, and if you received a congregation, then you were called father. Now Rome took over the structure of the Medo-Persian system for its church organization. So you have different orders with different goals and different ideologies. You have the Franciscans, the Dominicans, the Augustinians, the Jesuits, etc., etc. Each one concentrating on something different, but each one having churches under their control and being called father of the various congregations. So the organization is like the Roman Maitreya, because when the Romans took over the Medo-Persian, religion, they incorporated Mithraism. And the elite, the leaders in Rome, were Mithraics. Like Constantine was a worshipper of Mithra. And then that represents, of course, the feet of the bear. That's what it stands on. That's its organization. But it also has a philosophy. This beast has a philosophy, and it's not a biblical philosophy. It's a Greek philosophy. And so we find that they have a philosophy, for example, of natural law as the basis for determining what is right and wrong. And that is a Greek philosophy. And how they see the state of the dead, and how they incorporate all of these issues, and how they believe in rationalism above divine revelation, is all based on Greek philosophy. So the body of the beast is Greek. And then, of course, its legal system and its rulership power is Roman. It's, after all, called the Roman Catholic Church. And in the Middle Ages, it ruled the nations of Europe. Therefore, the crowns were on the horns. So this is a conglomerate beast where the Roman Catholic system has incorporated all the ideologies. So it's the only system that exists today that consists of the lion, the bear, the leopard, and the 10 horns, all in one organization, all the best ideologies. And when it received a mortal wound in 1798 and ceased to exist for a while, at least for the public eye, then the scripture says he went into captivity. And the Pope actually literally went into captivity. He that killeth with the sword, Rome killed with a sword, must be killed with a sword. So the beast received a mortal wound and it died. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. Now it takes patience, because this is not the end. Now it gets interesting. So in 1798, this system received a mortal wound. The papal states were taken away. The Pope was taken captive, and he was exiled from Rome. Mortal wound. We have a date for that verse. It's 1798. So the prophet sees the one beast entity going into captivity, and then he turns around and he sees another beast, and he describes it. And I saw another beast. Now we know what a beast is. A beast is a political entity coming up out of the earth. Now the first one came up out of the sea. Now the sea is the peoples, the nations, the multitudes, the kingdoms of the world. This one doesn't come up out of the sea, so it must be in an area where there are not political entities, political structures. Doesn't mean there are no people, it means there's no political structures. And it had 2 horns, like a lamb, and he spoke like a dragon. Now we know that the first horn spoke like a dragon, but this horn, this beast, had lamb-like principles, but he would speak like a dragon. So it's another kingdom which arises when the first one goes into captivity. Now, who could this be? Well, John Wesley, again, I love to refer to the reformers, in his notes on Revelation chapter 13, and these were written in 1754, says of the 2-horned beast, he's not yet come, though he cannot be far off, for he is to appear at the end of the 42 months of the first beast. Now Wesley already told us who the first beast was, so he knew that it was the papacy. And now, in 1754, he's seeing that this time period is running out, and he's wondering, where's the second beast? It should make its appearance. Well, it did make its appearance. And there's a reason why we use the buffalo here as a symbol. Let's have a look at the rise of the United States. 1776, there was the Declaration of Independence. That doesn't mean independence was accepted by the world. In 1783, most of the nations of the world acknowledged the independence of the United States, but not the superpower of the world at that stage, That was France. 1787, constitution is framed. You only really become a political entity once you have a constitution. 1791, the Bill of Rights was added, and in 1798, France recognized the independence of the United States. Now, this is fascinating. This is beyond coincidence, because France is the very nation that gave the first beast its mortal wound. And it is the very nation that recognizes the second beast and then sends a gift, the Statue of Liberty, which is a statue of Mithraism, to New York. And it's interesting that New York, the island where it stands, Manhattan, falls under maritime law. So it's actually an entity within itself. That's another lecture. 1863, Slave Emancipation Act. So they are lamb-like principles. And of course, the Bible refers to the Lamb of God that taketh away the sins of the world. So this must be another Christian nation. And this Christian nation has lamb-like principles, but will speak like a dragon. Now, if I want to know how a dragon speaks, I have to ask the first beast, because the dragon gave the first beast its power. So he spoke like a dragon, verse 11, and I'd like to ask the first beast, can you explain to me how a dragon sounds? Well, let's ask the first beast. The state has not the right to leave every man free to embrace whatever religion he shall deem true. The church has the right to require that the Catholic religion shall be the religion of the state to the exclusion of all others. So that's beast language. Freedom of conscience taken away. Now you will say, but Rome doesn't require that today. You can be whatever you want to be. Yes, provided you're in the ecumenical movement and provided you acknowledge the supreme authority of the Bishop of Rome. What if you do not do that? If you don't fall under that ambit of protection and inclusion, would this perhaps apply then? Could anyone that does not acknowledge this authority be excluded? Could the United States become prescriptive in terms of what you may or may not believe? Cursed be those who assert liberty of conscience and of worship, and such that maintain that the church may not employ force. This is the syllabus of Pope Pius, 1864. Well, this is the language of the first beast, contrary to the lamb-like constitution of the second beast, the United States of America. The Roman Catholic Church must demand the right to freedom for herself alone. La Civiltà Cattolica is the official Jesuit publication. So obviously that is what they believe. The Roman Catholic is to wield his vote for the purpose of securing Catholic ascendancy in this country, Catholic world. So that's beast language. That's dragon language. Now it's unthinkable that the second beast, with its lamb-like principles, would eventually speak like a dragon. So let's see how this unfolds. Verse 12. And it, the second beast, exercises all the authority of the first beast before him. That's an interesting statement. So he's exercising his authority on behalf of the first beast in the presence of the first beast, and causes the earth and those that dwell in it to worship the first beast whose deadly wound was healed. Now, how does a nation do that? How does it force someone to worship the first beast? Well, the Bible is quite clear. The Bible says, if you obey someone, then you are subject to that someone. So if you are subject to God, then you obey God. If you are subject to this system, the other system, then you obey that system. So, well, by definition, then you're either worshiping the one or the other. How could you do that? Well, by legislation. What if you made a law which honored the first beast but was contrary to Scripture, and everybody obeyed the law? Then they would be worshiping the first beast. and they would not be worshipping the God of the Bible. So how will this pan out? And it does great wonders, so that it makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and it deceives those dwelling on earth because of the miracles which were given to it to do before the beast. All right. So how does it deceive everyone into believing that it is right? Well, fire from heaven. Now some people claim that this is the atomic nuclear power of the United States, but I certainly don't believe that, because with this fire it deceives everyone, and an atomic bomb has never deceived anybody, it only killed them. So this must be another fire, and it must be a deceptive fire, all right? Okay. So what fire can come down from heaven that would be a deceptive fire that would deceive those dwelling on the earth because of miracles? What kind of religion comes out of the United States of America and is beamed across the world? Isn't it a power religion that is beamed across the world? Isn't it a religion of prosperity gospel? Isn't it a religion of miraculous healings? And people in their millions follow and believe this is an outpouring of the Spirit of God. And once the people have confidence in this religious system, they are prepared to follow it. And then the beast will say the following, saying to those dwelling on the earth that they should make an image to the beast who had the wound by the sword and live. Fascinating verse. So you have to make an image to the first beast. Now an image is something that looks like the original. If I stand in front of a mirror, what do I see? I see an image of myself. So if the second beast must become an image of the first beast, then it must become like the first beast. Now what was the first beast? The first beast had crowns upon the horns. In other words, the ecclesia, which, because it's a religious system, was ruling the powers, the horns, the divisions of the Roman Empire. It was ruling by ecclesiastical decree. So, this second beast, if it emulates the first beast in structure and becomes an image, must do likewise. It must become prescriptive in terms of its theology, and it must force the world to accept this theology, whatever it is that they propagate, and it must be a theology which belongs to Rome, to the first beast. Only then can they force everyone to make an image of the beast. In other words, allowing the church to dictate to the state. That's what happened in the first beast. Church and state united, fighting against God's people. In the end, church and state united, worshipping the first beast, and therefore they will persecute those who honor God rather than the system. Let's see how it works out. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. And the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So this power, this religio-political power, will become prescriptive in terms of what you may believe, and if you refuse to go along with that, you will be destroyed. You will be destroyed. You will be killed. Now my question is there religious turmoil in the world today, yes or no? Absolutely. There's religious turmoil. Are the battle lines being drawn as to what is acceptable religion and what is not? Yes, the battle lines are being drawn. So it's quite probable that the beast will at some stage say, so far and no further. If you have ideologies which clash with the mainline thinking, then you will come up against the force of the state. Is that a possibility? Now, it's interesting that in 2011, Washington and Rome became sister cities. Ciao Americana says, even the architecture of the two is very similar, and it's not by chance, it's by design. Interesting observation as they signed the sister city agreement. So even in its architecture, it seems as if the one is an image of the other. And, well, we'll see how interesting this can actually become. So an image would be church and state working in unison. That's something that is not enshrined in the Constitution of the United States, which is a lamb-like constitution. Therefore, things must change so that it can become a constitution similar to that of the first beast. Does the church have any dealings with politics in America? Yes or no? Well, here is the previous Cardinal of New York, who is the head of the Knights of Malta in the United States, and he's also always the military patron. And whenever the politicians get together, they have to appear before the Cardinal of New York. So whether you are representing the right, as in the case of McCain here, or whether you're representing the left, it makes no difference. You're just sitting either on the right-hand side or on the left-hand side of the Cardinal of New York. This is the military order of the Knights of Malta that actually controls what happens behind the scene. And in the previous lecture we saw that the Knights of Malta formed the CIA and the FBI, and all the top politicians belong to this organization in some way or another. And they all have to smile very happily. Now, Cardinal Egan has passed away, and so the next cardinal will take over. What's interesting is that every single president that has ever ruled in the United States has always been related to the previous one in some way, because they all come from one family. Now that's a very interesting point. They all come from a royal family. And if they all belong to one family, George Bush and Obama are cousins, and even McCain and the president today are cousins, far removed, but all from the same family. Obama through his mother. Interesting point of view. Now here's the new cardinal after Cardinal Egan passed away, Cardinal Timothy Dolan, and the politicians. He's the one that also led the Gay Pride rally as one of his first official acts. And here he is seen again with the politicians. And fascinatingly enough, you will see again, it is the representation of both parties sitting on either side. He seems to have something very important to say. He can be in a jovial mood or in a pensive mood, it seems, but you have to sit by his side. These are interesting signal pictures. The church is not divorced from the state in the United States of America. It's time for Protestants to go to the shepherd, the Pope, and to say, what do we have to do to come home, said Robert Schuller in 1987, and he was a 33-degree Freemason. And then, of course, in 2014, all the evangelicals were represented when they visited Pope Francis, and Kenneth Copeland was one of the leading figures. Tony Palmer, who was still alive at that stage, and has since had a serious accident which caused his death. They all came together to shake hands and to say, we have to come back home. Rick Warren came a little later, and he's America's first pastor. He's the one who did the inaugural prayer at Obama's inauguration. He said the first Reformation was about belief. This one is going to be about behavior. The first one was about the creeds. This one's going to be about our deeds. The first one divided the church. This time it will unify the church. So the wound is healing also ecclesiastically. The divisions that occurred amongst the Christian denominations will disappear in this grand ecumenical movement. So mega church pastor Rick Warren joins Pope Francis in support of a common mission. Pastor Rick Warren has called on non-Catholic Christians to join with Pope Francis and the Catholic Church in pursuit of their common goals. So the wound is healing not only politically, but also ecclesiastically. Up close, you can feel the humility and the compassion that others see from afar. So the world is coming together. Verse 13 and 14, and it does great wonders, so that it makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men. And this fire is deceptive. And because of the signs he was given power to do on behalf of the first beast, he deceived the inhabitants of the earth. So they believed that God was in this movement of church and state all joining together because they saw this outpouring. But the Bible calls it a deceptive outpouring. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. So this is a serious issue. We must look. There will be a death decree. Now, let's have a look at a little bit of typology.